Hi, fifth graders. Today you're going to need glue stick, scissors, composition book, and the grid paper that I asked you to print. If you are unable to print the grid paper, you're just going to have to go out with the grid paper on your notes and draw out what we do. So we're going to start by cutting out the grid paper, graph paper. These scissors are not the most friendly size for my fingers, but I'm making it work. Ay, ay, ay. Maybe not. So we're going to cut it out. The last thing we need to do is just cut off 4 squares from the bottom so it'll fit. So I'm going to turn it this way and count. I mean, four rows off from the bottom. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to cut 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to cut that off the bottom. Okay, and that's my paper. Before we start, let's add to our table of contents. We should be ready to add to page 22. Today we're going to make whole number times decimal models. We'll just put whole number times decimal there. That's all we can fit. But when we get to page 22, we will put the whole title on our page. Let's see, 20, 21. Let me make sure this is right. I haven't been updating this book. Let's see. Whole numbers, multiply or divide is 20, 21, 22. Uh-oh. Let me go back and see what I did wrong. Why is this off? Let's check this before we start. Divide. Oh, this is the one that I erased. Let me fix this. I see what I did. That was a mistake. I made a mistake on y'all's. Okay, so I'm going to move this around. This is going to be estimate the quotient. Now on page 21, y'all check yours. Page 22 is going to be, should be multiply or divide. This was divide by 2 digits. And now this is going to be a whole number times a decimal. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when I use when I forget to bring this to make videos. So I get confused in here. But now it's right. Your table of contents and my table of contents should match at this point. Okay, so page 23, we're going to put whole numbers by decimals. This will be 22. And this is page 23. And this is going to be whole numbers times decimals models. And so we're starting our first day of multiplying decimals, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to start with whole numbers times decimals, and then we'll move to decimals times decimals. So we're going to take this grid paper and glue it here. If you don't have grid paper, then you're just going to have to draw your models without the grid paper. It's doable. It's just lots of little squares you have to draw. It'll be fine. But if you can print this, it makes your job a little bit easier. Okay. Just making sure everything's glued on here. Here we go. All right. I am ready. I'm glued. I'm ready to go. Sorry for those that had to wait. Okay, so our first problem that we're going to do is the problem 3 times 800ths. 3 times 800ths. And we're going to model what this looks like. Okay. The first thing I want to say about models is that models have to have 3 parts represented in the picture that you see. When we're multiplying, that model should show you the first factor and the second factor. You should be able to see it in the model, and you should be able to find the answer. Every number sentence model will have all 3 parts of the problem: the factor, and the answer. So what I want you to think of when you see this is I want you to think of 3 groups. We're going to think 3 groups of 800ths. So I want you to think about what would it look like if you had 3 groups of 800ths. And we're going to use these little squares on our grid. We're going to use squares to represent each 100th. Okay, so every single square is going to equal 100th. So think about, how can we show 3 groups of 800ths? Well, we're going to start by drawing one group of 800th. So there would be 100th, this would be 200ths, 300ths, 400ths, 500ths, 600ths, 700ths, 800ths. So that would be one group of 800ths. How many do we have here? Remember, each square represents 100th. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So this represents 800ths. How many groups of 800ths do we have so far represented in this model? We have one group. So if we wanted to have 3 groups, we would have to do this again. So right here, I'm going to draw another group of 800ths. 7, 8. And this represents my second group of 800ths. And the problem is 3 times 800ths. So if I want to represent 3 groups of 800ths, because when you multiply, you're representing groups of a number. Okay, that means I'm going to need to draw another group so I can have 3 groups of 800ths. Okay, so that would be my third group of 800ths. So if we wanted to figure out what 3 times 800ths would be, we could just count all of the pieces here. Okay, so this would be my 1 group, 2 groups, 3 groups. So I would just have to add these together, and so that would give us 2400ths, because I know that 3 times oh, sorry, I need a 0 there. I'll probably like, that's not 800ths. Okay, so that's 800ths. I need that 0 there. So I know 3 groups of 800ths is going to be 2400ths. Okay, I can also check any model, and this is my big thing. If you're trying to find a model and you want to make sure all the parts are there, the way to find the right one is to do the algorithm. So when you multiply decimals, this is what the algorithm would look like. To do 3 times 800ths, we're going to write the number with the most number of digits on top, and 1, 2, 3 digits on here, and 1 digit here. So we would write 800ths on the top, and we would multiply that times 3. Okay, we're going to ignore the decimal to the end, and we're just going to do the algorithm like we normally would for whole numbers. So 3 times 8 is going to give us 24. We're going to regroup that 2. 3 times 0 is 0 plus 2. And then 3 times 0 would be 0. The last thing, there's just one extra step when you have decimals, and that's to count your decimal place values. So you can see that you go to each factor. 800ths is a factor, 3 is a factor. And you look for how many decimal places are in each number. So this number, 800ths, has 1, 2 decimal places that make up that number. The 3 is a whole number, so it doesn't have any decimal places, so we give it a 0. And then we add them together from both the factors, and then that tells us how many place values we need to move that decimal back in. So we're going to move it 1 and 2. So that means that our model is correct. We have 3 groups of 800ths is 2400ths. All right. So let's draw a line and let's do one more together before we move on to our practice. All right, so the next one is 2 times 1600ths. So we're going to think of this as 2 groups of 1600ths. 2 groups of 1600ths. So that's what we're solving for. When you do 2 times 1600ths, you're trying to figure out how much you would have if you had 2 groups of 1600ths. Okay. So we know that each one of these squares represents one piece, and I see that this one has a tenth, and then it has a 6 in the hundredths. So to represent 1600ths, to start, I'm going to draw 10 pieces for my one that's in the tenths place. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that represents the one that's in the tenths place. This is 1/10. But then this one has 600ths, so now all I have to do is draw 6 more squares. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's going to give me my first group of 1600ths. There's one group of 1600ths. This problem says 2 times 1600ths, so I need 2 groups of 1600ths. So I'm going to draw another group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, and then I have to do my 600ths. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so there's my second group. So here's one group of 1600ths, and here's 2 groups of 1600ths. One group of 1600ths and 2 groups of 1600ths. Okay, 1600ths times 1600ths. One group of 1600ths, 2 groups of 1600ths. All right, so if I wanted to know my answer, I really could just add them because multiplication is repeated addition. And that would give me 3200ths, okay? Of course, I want to check every single model that I do with the algorithm. Okay, so looking at this problem, how we set up a decimal times a whole number or a decimal times a decimal is the first thing we do to set up for the algorithm is we put the number that has the most number of digits on the top. And you see this one has more digits than this one. So I'm going to put 1600ths on top. My 2 is going to go right there. And that will allow me to do my algorithm. I'm going to ignore the decimal to the end, and I will take care of it then. So 2 times 6 is 12. Regroup the 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 1 more is 3, and 2 times 0 is 0. I am going to count my place values. This is the last step when you're multiplying decimals, is to go back in and count place values. So this one has 1, 2 place values. And I'm counting decimal place values. I do not count whole number place values. So I just count decimal place values. And today, and tomorrow, your numbers will have just one number will be a decimal and one number will be a whole number. So you'll follow probably this pattern a lot, with there being maybe one place value here and then 0 here, or 2 place values here, 0 here. That will change when we start multiplying decimals by decimals. Okay, so this represents the place values that we have to move that decimal back in. So we start at the back and we go 1 and 2, and so we get 32 hundredths. So with the model we got 32 hundredths, and with the algorithm we got 32 hundredths. And so that means that 2 times 16 hundredths is 32 hundredths. Okay, so you're ready to move on to your practice next.